week 8, digging deeper, which means we are 8 chapters into Acts, and we actually still have a podcast that's sticking around, I guess.
Yeah, well, there's thousands of chapters in the whole Bible, so
we're gonna be here for a long time.
We'll be doing this long after podcasts are cool.
Yeah,
that's how churches roll.
I guess so.
When society stops doing it, churches do it for another 10 years.
That could be a whole nother direction we take this podcast today, but we're going to stick with Acts, and I get a chance today to be the interviewer versus interviewee, which is nice because Robert put me on the hot seat last week.
He did. He went to the coals last week.
And if I remember last time you interviewed me, you kind of did the same thing. So
it was a polite.
This can be a seat of revenge or no, I don't know if I'll do revenge, but I am going to ask a couple questions that came directly from your message, and hopefully you'll be willing to share a little bit on a personal level. And then I have if we get there, I have a question in terms of how to interpret the Bible.
Okay.
So we'll go personal and then Bible interpretation at the end. Sound good?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. So yesterday, if you are watching, have not seen the sermon, we were in Acts chapter 8, looking at the incident between Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch. And you start off your message talking about how 2 days before you actually delivered a message, you still don't know what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, not a clue.
But I remember giving you that passage at least 6 to 8 weeks ago to preach.
Wow. That's where we're going. Okay.
So, so here's my question. Are you someone that thrives with a shorter deadline and procrastination? Or is it one of those things that you'd say, I'd actually just want to wait and see where I feel led when the moment gets here versus preparing in advance when you preach?
Well, you use the word or, but I don't think those are or. I think those are the same thing. Deadlines are both like, I need deadlines in my life, but using as much space as I can brings about the best results for me personally. So, and there's two things related to that. And the first is, and I can turn this around on you a little bit. I don't know where you're going, right? So if you create a series, and this is, sometimes we do a series where it's like topical, like here's 4 ideas that kind of fit together. That's a little easier because I have this very specific topic. But when we're doing Acts, it's like, or any book of the Bible, you can give me my topic, my chapter, my section 2 months ago, but I don't know what you'll have said 2 or 3 weeks leading up to it. Sure. I didn't, and I was in Mexico last week, so I didn't even get to hear your message last week. So I wasn't even sure what you were going to talk about or what you did talk about until like Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. So it can be hard for me to, number one, I don't naturally tend to work ahead. It's not the way my brain functions, but I loathe with all of my being wasting time. Like it's part of my wiring. I hate it. And if I do something and it ends up being wasted, I get like very like, Urgh. So a lot of times if I don't know where I'm going, I just like to sort of just wait and pause and let the dust settle. That's kind of what I did this week. On Tuesday, I was reading it. And I'm like, I could just sit in my office and like force it. But instead I'm like, let me just see what comes. And, that's just more my process. So everyone's different. But.
Yeah. And I guess being around you and knowing you for years, it seems like one of the things that I've noticed and appreciate is that generally what can be perhaps interpreted as like procrastination, I tend to think that when you have deadlines and you get close to deadlines, you become more productive.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's okay. I think it's trying to understand how everyone works. And some people, like, there's a difference between procrastinating and being lazy. And there's a difference between, no, I know when I operate best. And I think there's also something that I really appreciate about you is your sensitivity to the Holy Spirit to say, man, what does God have in this particular moment? And I felt like that's what came out yesterday because it definitely landed. And I'm just giving you a hard time about waiting. But when you first started, I was like, where's he going to go? Where's he going with this? And then it was great. Great.
I literally changed the first 3 minutes or 4 minutes of my message when I walked out on the stage. I cut half the first page and just started rambling in the first service. And then second service was already in my head, so I just did it again.
No, I honestly think that the honesty that you show on the front end was kind of diffusing and disarming and brought people in because it was like, oh, I'm really interested in where he's going to go with this because it seems like it's something fresh.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I thought that was a great start, but I also had to give you a little hard time because it was like, wait a minute, I gave you that passage. So, but I totally hear where you're coming from. I'm always trying to navigate week to week of what is going to be most effective and what God may want to say to our church this particular week. So,
and just to kind of keep going on that, it's almost an interesting topic in itself. The difference or the relationship between laziness and procrastination and deadlines, I have thought about that a lot in my life. And what's interesting is what I've come to is people that know me and that connect with me or work with me I've never been called lazy before. And yeah. I don't think I can be a little bit. I'm extremely wired for efficiency. And so my brain just wants everything to be efficient. And like, I want to make all my time, do things the easiest, fastest way. And so when I see a deadline, my brain says, well, the most efficient thing to do is to figure out how long it'll take me, back it up from that deadline, and that's when I'll start it. Because I get things done, but I'm the guy that opens up the dishwasher and just has this mini meltdown. I have to rearrange everything to be perfectly efficient.
That's because we were married to women from the same family, and their dishwasher etiquette is sin. We'll just say that.
You can't even use the word etiquette with it. It's just the worst, though. I will say this, and we're going to hit home here. My wife is okay. It's not like she's terrible, but there are times that I'll come home and I'll open the dishwasher and I'll look at it and I'll just be like, what just happened here? And it just happened a few days ago. And I turned to my wife and I said, what are you doing here? And I kid you not, she looks at me, she goes, oh, my mom was here. And I said, oh, okay.
Makes total sense. All right. We get it. We get it. So, all right. So before we go too far down a road that's going to end in family problems because we're talking about our mother-in-law, you talked about yesterday this lonely desert road that Philip traveled where he encountered and the Ethiopian eunuch. But then you also shared kind of the lonely desert road that you feel like God has called you on at times. And you specifically mentioned right after undergrad at college, going back to your hometown.
Yeah.
I guess my question first off is you use language like you felt like God told you or called you back to that place. How did you know that? Especially if you were graduating college and it's a place you didn't want to go, how did God convince you this is where you need to be?
Well, I made an offhanded comment in the first service about how it was my angel of the Lord moment. And I thought about getting into that story, but I was like, there's no time. I need to keep moving. So it was shortly after I got back. There's a church that my parents used to go to that had hired a new student pastor, and he knew about me through my sister and knew that I played guitar and was a musician. And so he did this whole kind of bait and switch thing on me. He was like, hey, I'm looking for someone to come do a show at our youth group. You want to play? The whole time he had it planned out. But I'm like, yeah, sure. So me and some of the guys, we had a band. Actually, your brother was part of that.
I remember that.
And we played some music. And then he was like, hey, why don't you come and do worship at our camp this summer? And I'm like, well, I got nothing else to do. Okay. So we were in, where were we? Somewhere in Kentucky at a college campus. I think it was called Murray State. And it was probably the second or third day. And we had sound check in the afternoon, and then we were free until after dinner when the service would start. And so I did sound check and I went back to this little dorm room by myself. And I was sitting there and I was reading a book called God Chasers by Tommy Tenney. And it was just really moving and impacting me. And I felt like I was speaking to me. And I just had this sense I just needed to put the book down. And I did. And I remember being in this little dorm, I sat on the floor against the bed and I just was there's no music or anything. And I was just quiet. And I just God, what, speak to me. I remember just sort of feeling that sense. And he just did. And I don't mean audibly, but internally. And I felt like I was hearing him say it. And it was relation to the book, and I don't want to get in the whole book, but this idea of, am I going to seek God for my life and things? And I'm like, God, I want to seek you. I want to do this thing. And I got dreams and plans for my life, and he said, here's my plan for your life. He's like, I want you to stay here and keep working with this youth ministry. I don't want you to go back to the college town where you were at. He's like, I want you to stay here. And I remember just being like, yeah, no, like, no, I don't want to do that. And I didn't even really want to do youth ministry. I liked college students, I like high schoolers and middle schools scared me. And I remember just sitting there and being so almost distraught about it. And I said, well, if that's what you want, okay. And after a while, I remember just leaving and went to dinner, and then we went and had like the service, and I got up, I'm leading worship at it. And I remember being kind of distracted about it. The guy gets up and preaches. I don't remember what he preached about, but then he invited us to come back up as a band and do like ministry time. And so I'm up there playing whatever, and kids are praying for each other. People are ministering. And there's this student, his name was Kyle Rains. He was a freshman. I had known him maybe a month at this point, and little tiny guy, he grew up, but he comes up to me, just super nervous look on his face. And he goes, hey, Pete, can I talk to you? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I put my guitar aside, and he goes, when you were singing, he's like, this is so weird, but I just felt like God spoke to me. And I was like, great, buddy. What did he say? That's so cool. And he goes, he told me to come and tell you that you're supposed to do whatever he told you today. And I was like, get out of my face.
I don't like Kyle anymore.
And I'm like, oh. And he goes, does that mean anything? I'm like, it does, Kyle. It does.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow.
And so I left the stage, and they were playing and I walked towards the back of the room, and my head's just kind of spinning. And the youth pastor, his name was Greg, he was standing at the back of the room, and he saw me, and he walks over and he puts his hand on his shoulder. He's like, hey, I know you got plans. We've talked about it. I know you can't wait to get back to the college town and everything you're doing there. But when you were up there, the Lord told me I'm supposed to offer you an internship, and you can do whatever you want with it. And I just looked at him like, fine, I'll do it. He goes, no, pray about it. Pray about it. No, I'll do it. He's like, oh, okay. And so, wow. I got home that Friday, and the next Monday I started working at the church, and I was there for 4.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did your heart open up over those 4 years? Like, you kind of said yes begrudgingly, obediently, but
yeah, like
did it change at all in the time, or was it just like, yeah, this was actually a really lonely desert time for 4 years?
I think that it was there were good times in it. There were and there's always moments. It was rewarding, it was fulfilling. I never questioned whether God wanted me there. I questioned how long he wanted me there. There's a lot of times like, can I leave yet? There were some times that I would take a weekend off and drive down and hang out with you guys, you and Matt and others, and be like, oh, this sucks. I don't want to go back to. There were definitely times I just really wished I had a girlfriend and was married. And I don't know, because you're hanging out with middle schoolers and you're 23. It's like Saturday
they're not
night.
options. You can't marry them. That'd be terrible.
Yeah. And we'd have middle school service on Saturday night, so I would literally be at church, and then it was like, when am I gonna go home and watch TV? It was, I don't know. When it was time to go, when God gave me permission to leave, I was excited to go.
Yeah. So how did that happen? Just briefly, like, he gave you permission to go. I think it's important, because I think sometimes we use these types of phrases like, God told me this, or God said this, like, and it was really helpful to hear the confirmation piece that he gave you to stay. So how did he release you to say it's time to go?
Nothing bad happened, but my relationship with the senior pastor became strained when I fell in love with his daughter.
I did not know that's where this was going, but this is awesome. This is awesome.
He didn't approve of me as someone that he thought would be a good fit for her.
Oh.
And that's me saying it kindly, I guess. Yeah, he told her that she had to break up with me, or he was going to stop paying for college. And that was sort of my moment of being like, I think I need to leave. And at that point, I had talked to Greg, who's one of the most influential people in my life ever. And he was my mentor and my boss. And he just said, I understand. And he's like, well, do you feel, he's like, just finish out the year. It was probably 8 months left. And then, see what God leads, and I'll, let you, whatever. And so I left. I felt a freedom to go, but also like, I can't stay here anymore, and needed to get out. And Oh man, this took a weird turn.
It did. I have all these
my
other
goodness.
questions, but now I'm like, I have follow-ups.
You didn't
and
know that? I never told you that.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, it was a difficult season. And what was hard was I was somebody who, as a young man, wanted desperately to have that guy's approval. He was somebody that I was obsessed with him liking me, and before I even felt that way about his daughter. So there was a lot of personal rejection, not just in two things happened. Here's why I bring it up. One of them was there was the personal side of it, of like I personally feel like apparently I'm not good enough. But what was really the most difficult thing, and I look back and know that it was God, was I know that one of the primary things he had against me was that he saw, at that point, I guess I was probably 25. He saw a 25-year-old with no direction in life. And he would ask me that, like, Pete, where's this headed? What are you doing? You know, you're doing worship for the youth. You're helping me run this college ministry part-time. You're painting houses with your dad. Like, what are you going to do with your life? And what was so hard for me was that I wanted to give him an answer. I wanted to look at this guy in the face and be like, here's my 20-year plan of exactly what I'm going to do and why I'm going to be successful. And I'll take care of your daughter or whatever. And all I could say was, I have no idea because God told me to be here and he hasn't told me what to do after this. And I felt in my heart like I was being punished.
Wow.
Because
for the obedience.
God had told me to do this and didn't give me any clarity. And even Greg, my mentor, who was so much, you know, he's just really a great friend as well. He was one of the few people that really understood, like, because he knew my story, and he's like, I know you're trying to be obedient, and like, I know you can't give a clear answer, but like, even then, sometimes he'd be like, but what do you want to do? You know, and I'm like, I don't know how to explain to you that I don't feel like it's up to me. I feel like it doesn't matter what I think I want to do. Like, I know that God is going to direct my paths, and he's told me to stay here, and that's all he told me. And he has. And that, in retrospect, I look back, you know, over the last 15 years, and I don't regret any of it. I regret, I guess, taking so much of it personally and spending so much time in my 20s feeling what I felt, because I wish I could go back and tell him. I wish I could go back like 15 years and say, Pete, the things you're feeling right now are just BS. It's not true. It's not real. You're right. God is right. Don't let that stuff get to you. But I was just, you know, an emotional 25-year-old. So yeah, in retrospect, I know that God always guided my steps. He always has, and he will. But it was hard to explain that to other people who.
Yeah. Which is interesting, thinking of the passage, because I think sometimes when we preach, you know, we try to package it in a way that hopefully is relatable to people, hopefully is condensed in time, because there's so much you could say and what are you going to say. But there's also so much, at times, personal stuff wrapped into it that people never know. And so just even thinking of Philip and the eunuch, the way you ended the message kind of was this juxtaposition between two. Philip was you in your 20s, God calling you to go somewhere and wondering why. Yeah. But then you talked about likely the eunuch feeling the rejection that he felt from what he had to experience. And so you had the merging of both of these. And so your personal life was really wrapped into that story. And I think that's why we're trying to do this podcast, because I think it's important to see that sometimes when God gives you something 2 days in advance to talk about, it wasn't something that was procrastination. It was something God's actually been working for 20 years and just showed it to you through his word.
Yeah, I think that's true. And that's what happened. And it's why when I actually got up yesterday to talk, I was in a different place than I was a few days earlier, where it was like, because I don't just want to get on a stage and talk about stuff. I like, if it doesn't mean anything to me, I don't want to talk about it. Like, okay, here's a passage, and it's so easy to find religious-y things to say about, because it's the Bible. It's like, it's so easy to do that. Like, having been doing this now for 20 some years, it's so easy to phone it in and just be like, here's some trite, quick, easy things I know I can say that people will nod their head and amen to. And like, I just hate that. And like, I want it to mean something to me, because if it doesn't mean anything to me, why should it mean anything to people
Anybody
listening?
else? Yep.
So,
Yep.
and that was why it was really hard for me, because I'm like, I need this to mean, and yeah, I guess in finding something that meant a lot to me, it changed the message a lot.
Yeah.
And it brought up a lot. It was a weird week. It was a weird week.
I saw you after service, and sometimes I know preaching 2 services can make you tired, but you kind of had that like, I'm spent.
Yeah.
And I wonder if a part of it's just like, I felt like 2 weeks ago when I preached, it was one of those, like there was a lot of emotion that came out of me because it was so tied personally to me, that when you preach something that has a part of your life really attached to it, it kind of is a release and a drain and like oh my gosh, like I didn't just preach a message, I just gave you a part of my life.
Yeah. And one thing I've tried to figure this out about myself, just, we're all on journeys of figuring out who we are as people. I'm not a person who's like afraid to be honest. I'm not someone that can't just tell you exactly, like but I'm a weird mix of, I'm transparent as a person, but I'm also extremely private as a person. Yeah. I don't like attention. I don't like people feeling
touching you.
I don't like people feeling sorry for me. I don't like people being like, oh, like I'm just trying to communicate something that hopefully can help you. I don't want you to look at me. And there was a moment in the second service where I was telling, I was like, and this never happens to me, I almost started like crying in the middle of my message. And I was like, which is just like, I was like, this is messing me up, because I don't want to be the show. I don't want to be the thing that people are looking at. And so it wasn't like I'm afraid to people see me cry. I'm just more like, it's not about me. Yeah. But yeah, it was like the last couple of days before that, I just brought up all this stuff in my heart that I kind of haven't talked about or thought about in a while. And it was good. It wasn't a bad thing. It was like, I think just I had a really cool moment with the Lord on Thursday afternoon. And I'm glad. It brought me closer to him. So no regrets. But yeah, it was heavy.
Wow.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I had, when we do these episodes, the person getting interviewed does not know the questions, and the person doing the interview, I'm not sure. I have, if you can see my little thing here, I have all these questions that are not getting asked, and that's okay because we're out of time. But I feel like this is important to kind of pull the curtain back. That's what we talk about, to see what's behind the message. And I think anyone that listened to it yesterday or is going to listen to it in the coming days or weeks, it's going to resonate, because we all have some of those moments of those desert lonely roads. And, I have lots of questions that would involve like suffering and why God allows suffering, but maybe that's another episode, and even some other things. But I think today I appreciate you just sharing your heart, and I guess to hear, if you're listening, just to know that like, I can't speak for all preachers, but I know here at Rise City, I feel like we try to do our best, and I really appreciate yesterday you doing that, like to not preach something at people, but to preach something with the people in mind, because we're journeying with them together. And I felt like you took us on a journey that you've been on, and may all of us still have to go on yet. There could be some more desert, lonely roads that are in front of us. Yeah. But I think what God spoke through you is going to help equip us to see that there's hope wherever that leads. So
thanks.
Appreciate that.
So I could do it.
Yeah.
It's got heavy. Woo.
It got heavy the last couple of weeks, man.
Joke.
So yeah. We'll end there. Yeah. But if you have questions for Pete, in particular about the message, make sure maybe to post them in the comments if you are watching this online, or just reach out to us. But man, it's an honor to be able to get in God's Word with everyone and journey with everybody. So thanks for hanging out with us today again, and we'll be back next week as I preach on Acts chapter 9, Saul to Paul, and I think Ben's
on next week. Yeah. It's going to be good.
So we'll see you next week.
All right, guys. See ya.